Imagine you're on an Indonesian island. You've entered a humid cave. Something moves in the corner. You spin around. What you discover will boggle your mind. Human-like figures, and they're tiny. You're staring at hobbits. I'm talking about hobbits, but not the fantasy kind, and not anything weird. I mean the real ancient human species, nicknamed hobbits, Homo floresiensis. In 2003, the Flores people were discovered, taking humanity and scientists by storm. How did these little people exist? What did they eat? Who were their predators? And why did they go extinct? Hold on to your hats, because we're going back in time to the hobbits. You can almost hear the water moving out there. That low, endless pull between islands that shouldn't have been crossable. Their story actually begins more than 1 million years ago, in the middle of something that still feels impossible. Their ancestors, most likely a band of Homo erectus who'd been living on Java, somehow found themselves facing those deep ocean channels. This wasn't a casual swim. We're talking real open water survival, the kind where the only thing between you and the horizon is whatever driftwood and matted vegetation you could cling to during a storm or after a volcano shook everything loose. How they made it across, no one can say for sure, but they did. When they finally stepped onto Flores, the island must have felt both generous and stingy at once. Plenty of green, sure, but food was limited. And at first, there weren't any big predators to keep them on their toes. That's when the quiet change began. Insular dwarfism. The same thing that happened to the elephants who arrived on the same unlikely route and shrank over generations into smaller, island-sized versions we call Stegodon. These early humans went through it too. Bodies got smaller, needs got smaller. In a place where every calorie had to be earned, being compact wasn't a disadvantage. It was the only thing that made sense. Less food required, better chances of lasting. By around 700,000 years ago, we already have clear traces of these smaller hominins at places like Mata Menge. They weren't just passing through anymore. They'd settled, adapted, and they stayed. Not for a few hundred years, but an almost unimaginable stretch of time. Here's the strange part that stays with you. Sometimes the longest, most dangerous journeys don't end with giants. They end with survivors who learned, quietly and over countless generations, how to fit exactly where they landed. And in doing so, they became something the world had never seen before. You can hear the water before anything else. A slow, steady drip somewhere in the back of Liang Bua cave, marking time the way it has for longer than memory. The air presses against your skin, warm, thick, carrying the smell of wet stone and yesterday's fire. Step outside and the jungle doesn't welcome you. It simply is. Vines thick as your arm, volcanic soil dark and rich, and a sky that can turn from clear to storm in the time it takes to sharpen a stone. This was Flores, tens of thousands of years ago, an island cut off long enough for evolution to get creative and dangerous in ways that still feel personal when you picture it. The neighbors weren't like anything on the mainland. There were the Stegodon, these small elephants, no bigger than a large cow, moving in careful herds through the ferns. Giant rats, some as bold as small dogs, would nose right up to the edge of camp. But the sky and the kill sites held their own threat, the giant storks. Nearly 2 meters tall, with wings that could suddenly darken the ground and a beak like a spear. They didn't just wait politely, they competed hard for every carcass, sometimes driving even the Komodo dragons off a fresh Stegodon. And for people barely 1 meter high, these birds were more than scavengers. A lone hunter caught out, or a child who wandered too far from the group could find themselves facing something that saw them as possible prey. Daily life for these small bands wasn't about grand plans. It was about making it through another day, with tools that looked almost identical to the very first ones ever made in Africa. Sharp flakes and points that could butcher what they caught or shape a wooden spear. They went after the young Stegodon and wild boar, the ones they could actually bring down. You can still read the story in the cut marks on the bones they carried back to the cave. They worked wood and plants too, and they kept fire alive inside the cave. That small, steady glow must have felt like the center of everything when the night sounds grew too close. But here's the thing about paradise when it's also a trap. Danger never really left. A Komodo dragon could ambush you near the water. A giant stork could appear from above or claim your hard-won kill before you even got it back to the cave. The volcanoes could rewrite the entire valley in a single afternoon. And then slowly, the rains began to fail. Between roughly 76,000 and 61,000 years ago, the island started to dry. Food grew scarcer, especially the Stegodon. These weren't big-brained strategists. They were just stubbornly good at staying alive in a place that kept trying to make that impossible, even when the sky itself had teeth. And they did it for hundreds of thousands of years. One emotional truth: survival on Flores wasn't about being the biggest or the smartest. It was about reading every shadow on the ground and in the sky, and still choosing to step outside together. Imagine waking inside the cave while the light is still thin. Children stir first, small voices, bare feet on stone. Adults are already moving. Someone tends the fire. Someone else reaches for the stones kept in the same place every morning. The sound of tool making fills the space, that sharp, rhythmic crack of stone against stone. It takes patience. It takes hands that have done this 1,000 times. Flakes come off in clean, usable pieces. No one rushes. There's no clock, only the day ahead. Some of the group head out to forage, tubers, fruits, whatever the jungle is willing to give today. Others form the hunting or scavenging party. They move quietly, watching for signs. A juvenile Stegodon separated from the herd, a giant rat caught in a simple trap. When they succeed, the return to the cave is quieter than the leaving. Meat is brought inside, but sometimes the giant storks are already there at the edge of the trees, wings half spread, watching. The group stays tight, voices low, until the birds move on, or the hunters claim what's theirs. Everyone shares, no one hoards. In groups this small, that isn't generosity, it's the only math that keeps everyone breathing. If someone came back injured, a twisted ankle, a bad scrape from thorns or teeth, the others don't debate whether to help, they just do. Food is passed, wounds are cleaned with what they have. Children stay close to the adults who can watch them. Knowledge moves the same way food does, quietly, constantly. How to read the signs before a storm, which plants are safe, where the dragons and the giant storks like to wait. That knowing gets handed down without lectures, just by being together. By the time the light starts to fade, the cave feels different, warmer. The fire is built up again. People sit closer. Stories aren't told in long speeches. They're told in the way someone demonstrates how to hold a new flake or points out the direction the wind came from today. The vulnerable eat first when there's not quite enough. The strong stay alert a little longer. And then, slowly, the group settles. Another day ends the way most of them did, not with triumph, but with everyone still there. If you were standing just inside the cave mouth, watching, you'd feel it in your chest. This wasn't a collection of individuals trying to survive alone. This was a single living thing, made of many bodies, moving through time together, even when the sky had its own hunters. One emotional truth: in a world this unforgiving, looking after each other wasn't optional. It was the only way tomorrow arrived. Around the same centuries the hobbits were moving through the jungles of Flores, the world was running several different experiments in being human at once. Far to the north and west, early Homo sapiens were already spreading through Asia. Bigger brains, more layered tools in some places, and eventually the ability to move into almost every environment they found. They reached the region around Flores not long after the hobbits disappear from the record. Whether they overlapped directly is still debated, but the timing is tight. On another set of islands, the Philippines, a different small-bodied group, Homo floresiensis, was living its own version of island life. Similar size, similar challenges, probably shaped by the same forces of isolation and limited resources. Island dwarfism wasn't a one-time trick. It happened more than once when the sea cut populations off long enough. Meanwhile, in Europe and parts of Asia, Neanderthals and Denisovans were living with large brains, complex tools, art, and careful burials. They had their own ways of caring for the sick and remembering the dead. Different brains, different tools, different stories. None of these groups were better in some universal sense. They were simply what worked where they were. The hobbits prove something that still feels surprising. There was never only one correct shape for a human life. Different islands, different climates, different pressures, and different successful answers. Some lasted longer than others, some left more traces, but for a very long time, several versions of us walked the earth at the same time. The truth is, being human has never been a single story. It's always been a collection of stories, each one shaped by the ground it stood on.
By about 50,000 years ago, something in the record at Liang Bua simply stops. The drying that began earlier had already made life harder. Rainfall kept dropping. The Stegodon populations that had once been reliable prey grew smaller and more scattered. The giant storks and the Komodo dragons felt the squeeze too. Every carcass became a fight. The island that had supported these small people for so long was becoming stingier year by year. Then another change arrived. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, reached this part of the world around the same time. Whether they met the hobbits face to face or simply competed for the same shrinking resources, we don't know. There are no clear signs of violence in the bones, no dramatic last stand, just absence. The most likely picture is quieter than most endings we imagine. The climate had already weakened the old food web. The arrival of another group of humans added pressure on whatever was left. In small populations already living close to the edge, that combination can be enough. One bad season turns into 2, then 5. Knowledge that used to be passed down has fewer people left to carry it. The cave that had been home for generation after generation grows silent. We don't know the exact last day or the exact last person. We only know that after more than 700,000 years of continuous presence on the island, the hobbits vanish from the archaeological record around 50,000 years ago. 3 leading possibilities remain: climate alone, competition with arriving humans, or the two acting together. The evidence doesn't point to one dramatic cause. It points to a world that slowly stopped being able to support them the way it once had. The simple truth is that stories often end in silence. The moment a way of living slips away because no one remains to carry it forward. The hobbits of Flores didn't leave monuments or written records. They left something quieter and in its own way more powerful.
They crossed water to reach an island most animals never reached. They shrank, literally, to fit what the island could give. They made tools, kept fire, hunted together, and cared for their injured and their young, with brains no larger than a chimpanzee's. They lasted for hundreds of thousands of years in a place that was never easy, even with giant storks in the sky and dragons on the ground. That isn't a footnote in the human story. That is the human story, told in one of its smaller, tougher dialects. They remind us that being human has never been measured by the size of the brain alone. It has always been measured by what a group could do together when the world pushed back. Adaptation, cooperation, stubborn, creative endurance. If you stand on Flores today, in the same hills, near the same cave, the jungle still breathes, the volcanoes still rumble, the Komodo dragons still move like living shadows, and somewhere in the layers of that earth are the quiet traces of people who were never supposed to last as long as they did. What do you find most astonishing about them? That they survived at all? That they did it with such small brains? Or that their story only reached us because a handful of curious scientists kept asking questions long after the trail had gone cold? If this deep dive into our lost cousins stayed with you, hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell. There are more of these forgotten chapters waiting in the record, each one stranger, tougher, and more human than the last. Because the past doesn't just sit there, it waits for us to listen. The fact is, the measure of a people isn't how big their brains were, it's how long they kept choosing each other when everything else said give up.